He gave his best mule to save the Apache sisters and unleashed his father's fury. His family had lived on this land for generations, carving a life out of the soil and the hard work that came with ranching. From a young age, he had learned to care for the animals, to mend fences, and to respect the land. The life was not easy, but it had its quiet rewards. The sound of the wind through the grass, the laughter of a calm evening, and the satisfaction of work well done. Among all the animals on the ranch, none held more importance to Ethan than his best mule, a strong, intelligent creature with soft brown eyes that seemed to understand him. The mule had been a gift from his father when Ethan had proven himself responsible, and it had quickly become his constant companion. He had named it Braveheart, for it carried not just his burdens but, in a sense, his dreams. Ethan's father, Mr. Carson, was a stern man, shaped by a lifetime of harsh lessons and the relentless demands of ranch life. He valued hard work above all else and believed in strict rules and discipline. He had little patience for what he called foolish acts of kindness that could risk the ranch or the family's reputation. Ethan loved his father deeply, but he also feared him, for he knew the sharp edge of his anger. Every decision Ethan made seemed to weigh heavily, balancing his own desires with his father's expectations. The nearby Apache lands were home to families who lived close to nature, moving with the seasons, and often surviving on the generosity of neighbors. Ethan had known some of the people there since childhood, but he had always been careful to respect the boundaries his father had set. The Carson family had rarely had conflicts with their neighbors, but tensions and misunderstandings were never far from the surface in this harsh land. One morning, as Ethan was checking the fences along the northern edge of the ranch, he noticed a small figure struggling in the distance. He squinted through the heat waves rising from the earth and recognized two young Apache sisters, no more than 15 and 17, their clothes torn and dusty, moving as quickly as they could. Ethan's heart ached at the sight. He had heard rumors that raiders had been attacking families in the area, stealing supplies, and leaving people to fend for themselves. It was rare, but in times like these, even those who kept to themselves could find danger knocking at their doors. Ethan hesitated, torn between his father's strict rules and the urgent need before him. He knew if he didn't act, the sisters could be left to the mercy of the land, without food, water, or transportation to escape the raiders. His mind raced. What could he do? He looked at Braveheart, who nickered softly, as if sensing the weight of the decision Ethan was about to make. The mule had always been reliable, strong enough to carry loads and travel long distances. But giving him away, even temporarily, would be an act that would infuriate his father, who treasured Braveheart not just for his strength, but for the history and hard work the mule represented. The sisters were moving slower now, clearly exhausted, their small frames struggling against the unforgiving terrain. Ethan knew that hesitation could cost them dearly. He ran toward them, waving his hands to get their attention. When they saw him, relief washed over their faces. One of the sisters stumbled and Ethan caught her gently, offering a hand. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low but urgent. "There's danger coming and you need help." The sisters explained, in quick, hurried words, how they had lost their supplies and had no way to escape the raiders who had been threatening their home. Ethan listened carefully, nodding, feeling a sense of responsibility welling inside him. He realized that there was only one way to help them. They needed a fast, strong animal to carry them and whatever they could salvage to safety. He looked at Braveheart, standing nearby, snorting softly. The mule was sturdy and loyal, the very creature that could carry them to safety. A sense of fear mixed with resolve settled in Ethan's chest. He knew the consequences at home would be severe. His father would be furious, perhaps yelling, perhaps punishing him in ways that would linger in his memory. But the thought of leaving the sisters to face danger without help was unbearable. Ethan knelt beside Braveheart, stroking his neck. "I think you know what we have to do," he whispered, as if the mule understood the importance of the task. Braveheart nuzzled him in response, patient and steady, ready for whatever lay ahead. Ethan quickly saddled the mule, taking care to make sure the sisters could ride safely. They climbed onto Braveheart and Ethan helped steady them. "Hold on tight," he instructed, his voice calm but firm. The sisters nodded, their eyes wide with both fear and hope. Ethan watched them start toward safety, the dust rising behind their path. His heart ached with the knowledge that the journey was dangerous, but relief mingled with his fear. At least they had a chance. When the sisters had disappeared into the distance, Ethan turned back toward the ranch. The sun was high now, and the day was heating up. He knew that what he had done would not go unnoticed for long. Soon, his father would discover Braveheart was gone. The thought of his father's anger made his stomach twist. Yet despite the fear gnawing at him, Ethan felt a deep, quiet pride. He had chosen to do what he believed was right, even at a personal cost. Back at the ranch, Ethan's father was working in the barn when he noticed the empty paddock. His eyes narrowed immediately. "Where is Braveheart?" he demanded, his voice sharp as a whip crack. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry, and said, I took him to help someone. They needed him." Mr. Carson's face turned red with fury. "You what? You took him without asking. That mule is not yours to give." His hands clenched into fists and his voice shook with anger. Ethan stood tall, trying to maintain his composure. "I know, father, but they were in danger. They had nowhere else to turn. I couldn't leave them there." For a long moment, the ranch was silent except for the sounds of the wind and the faint cries of birds in the distance. The father's face was a storm of emotion, anger, disbelief, and something Ethan almost caught glimpses of, a reluctant understanding. But that understanding was buried beneath generations of hard rules and expectations. Ethan felt a mixture of dread and relief. He had acted on his conscience, risking the ire of his father, and in doing so, he had shown the depth of his own character. He knew this day would be remembered, not just for the conflict it created at home, but for the choice he had made to help those in need. The sisters' safety had come first, and that decision marked the beginning of something that would change his life forever. The day turned slowly into evening, with the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. Ethan sat on the porch, looking out over the plains, thinking of the sisters riding toward safety and of the storm that awaited him at home. Braveheart's absence was a heavy reminder of the path he had chosen. He did not regret it, but he knew that the consequences would be real and immediate. As the stars began to appear one by one, Ethan made a quiet promise to himself. He would stand by his choices, face the anger, and continue to act with the same courage and compassion that had guided him this day. He did not know how his father would respond in the long run, but he knew one thing for certain: some acts of kindness required great courage, and he had found that courage within himself. The night settled over the ranch, calm yet charged with the tension of the events to come. Ethan's story was only beginning, and the path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, he felt a quiet confidence that, even in the face of anger and hardship, doing what is right can make a difference. And sometimes, that difference is worth every risk. Ethan spent the next few hours in a quiet, restless state. The sisters were far from danger now, riding Braveheart across the rough plains toward the safety of a neighboring village. But he could not stop thinking about what he had done, and the storm he was about to face at home. The sun hung high, casting long shadows across the ranch, and every sound, the creak of the barn door, the call of a distant hawk, seemed magnified as his mind raced with worry. He knew his father's anger would not be gentle. It was fierce, sharp, and unyielding. And yet, he also knew that the act he had done was right. As he moved through the ranch, checking on the other animals, he could not help but feel the emptiness where Braveheart usually stood. The mule had been more than just a working animal. It had been a companion, a symbol of trust and reliability, and losing him, even temporarily, felt like a void in his daily life. Ethan ran his hands along the fence posts, thinking of the sisters, faces, the fear in their eyes, and the gratitude that had shone through even in those brief moments. He reminded himself that Braveheart was fulfilling a purpose far greater than pulling a cart or carrying supplies. He was saving lives. The air was heavy with anticipation as Ethan made his way toward the barn, knowing that the moment of confrontation was approaching. When he entered, he found his father pacing, boots crunching against the dry earth, his face red with frustration. The silence was broken only by the distant wind and the occasional bark of a dog. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady the pounding of his heart. "Father," he began softly, "I did what I thought was right." Mr. Carson stopped abruptly and turned, his eyes narrowing. "Right? You call this right?" he demanded, his voice booming across the barn. "You took my mule without permission. That mule represents years of work and you gave it away to strangers." Ethan met his father's gaze steadily. "They were in danger, Father. They had no food, no way to escape. I could not leave them there." His voice was calm, though his heart raced. "Braveheart was the only one strong enough to help them. I had to do something." The tension between them hung in the air like a storm cloud, thick and heavy. Mr. Carson's fists were clenched, his jaw tight, and every muscle in his body seemed coiled with anger. Yet beneath the fury there was a flicker of something else, an understanding, however reluctant, of Ethan's courage. He had acted out of compassion, not recklessness, and part of him knew it. But the other part, shaped by years of tradition and strict rules, could not forgive so easily. "You have no idea what you've done," Mr. Carson said, his voice quieter now but still sharp. "That mule is not just an animal. He is part of this family. He carries the weight of our work, our pride, and now he's gone because of your foolish decision." Ethan felt a pang of guilt, but he did not waver. "I understand, Father, and I am sorry for taking him without asking, but I could not watch innocent people suffer. If I had waited, it might have been too late. I did what I thought was right, even knowing the cost." For a moment, silence settled over the barn. Even the wind seemed to pause as if listening to the exchange. Then Mr. Carson let out a long, frustrated sigh and ran a hand over his face. "You are stubborn," he muttered, almost to himself. "I see that, and I see that your heart is in the right place, but sometimes doing the right thing comes with consequences you cannot imagine." Ethan nodded. "I am ready to face the consequences, Father. I know I have broken your rules and I accept whatever punishment you think is fair, but I do not regret helping them, not for a second." The father's gaze softened slightly, though the anger had not fully vanished. He turned away, moving to the workbench and picking up a tool, fiddling with it as if it gave him a way to control his emotions. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," he said quietly. "Full of idealism, wanting to help everyone, not always thinking of the consequences. You think bravery is easy, but it is not. It comes with a price." Ethan looked down at the dirt floor, understanding what his father meant. He had chosen a path of courage, and that path was never without risk. The sisters were safe, yes, but he had defied the one person whose opinion mattered most to him. He felt a deep ache, a mixture of pride and sorrow. He knew that the coming days would be difficult, and yet he also knew that he had acted with integrity. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, Ethan decided to prepare for whatever lay ahead. He worked diligently around the ranch, tending to chores and making sure everything was in order, trying to show his father that he remained responsible despite his earlier actions. He repaired fences, fed the livestock, and checked on the smaller animals, all the while thinking about the sisters and hoping that Braveheart was carrying them safely across the plains. Evening came, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The quiet of the ranch was comforting, yet Ethan could feel the weight of the upcoming confrontation pressing on him. He knew his father would want to discuss the matter further, and perhaps the storm of anger would continue. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, to reflect on the choice he had made. He thought of the sisters' fear and relief, of the way they had clung to Braveheart, trusting that someone cared enough to help them. That thought gave him strength. Night fell and the stars emerged, bright against the darkening sky. Ethan sat outside for a while, staring at the constellations, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. He knew that his decision was not just about the mule or the immediate danger. It was about courage, compassion, and standing by one's principles. He had chosen to help those in need, even if it meant angering his father. And in that choice, he had discovered something vital about himself. That sometimes, doing the right thing requires bravery greater than any physical strength, greater than any fear of punishment. Hours later, the sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance, and Ethan's heart leapt. Could it be Braveheart returning? Or perhaps he was imagining it, hoping for a sign that the sisters were safe. Either way, the sound reminded him that life on the plains was unpredictable, full of danger and opportunity, and that each choice had consequences. He had chosen wisely in his heart, even if the world around him might not yet see it that way. Inside the house, Mr. Carson sat quietly, a rare moment of contemplation passing over his stern features. He was not a man quick to admit admiration, but as he thought of Ethan's actions, a reluctant respect stirred within him. The boy had acted out of compassion, out of courage, and had faced fear with determination. That was no small thing, and it would not be forgotten. Ethan finally went to bed that night, exhausted from the day's events, yet his mind remained active, replaying the moments when he had helped the sisters, the sound of Braveheart's steady steps, and the grateful expressions on the girls' faces. He fell asleep with a sense of quiet resolve, knowing that the path ahead would be challenging, but also knowing that he had chosen rightly. The night was long but full of promise. Ethan's story was only beginning, and while the consequences of his actions had yet to unfold fully, he had already begun to understand the power of courage and kindness. He had learned that helping others often meant taking risks, and that true bravery was measured not by strength alone, but by the willingness to act when it mattered most. As the stars shone over the plains, Ethan dreamed of the journey ahead, for himself, for the sisters, and for the lessons that would shape both him and his father. Tomorrow would bring challenges, perhaps anger and conflict, but also growth, understanding, and the quiet triumph of a young man who had chosen to stand for what was right. And in that choice, he had discovered the beginning of a story that would define him for the rest of his life. The next morning, the sun rose over the plains, casting long shadows across the ranch. Ethan woke with a heavy heart, knowing that today would bring the full weight of his father's fury. Sleep had offered little comfort. His dreams were filled with imagined scolds and punishments, the echo of his father's booming voice, and the fear that he had done something unforgivable. Yet beneath the fear, there was a steady pulse of resolve. He had helped the sisters. He had done the right thing. No anger or punishment could erase that truth. As Ethan stepped outside, he saw his father already at work, inspecting the fences with a sharp eye and precise movements. Mr. Carson had the air of a man preparing for confrontation, every motion deliberate, as though he were waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan approached cautiously, feeling the tension in the air like a thick fog. "Father," he began softly, "I know you are angry. I am ready to face whatever consequences you decide are fair." Mr. Carson stopped abruptly, turning to face his son. His face was red, a mix of anger and disbelief, his eyes hard and unyielding. "Ethan," he said, his voice trembling slightly with controlled rage, "do you understand what you have done? That mule was not just an animal. He was a symbol of this family's labor, of our pride, of everything we have worked for. And you gave him away." Ethan met his father's gaze without flinching. I understand, father. I know Braveheart is important to you, to all of us, but the sisters were in danger. They needed him to survive. I could not leave them there. I had to act. Mr. Carson's fists clenched at his sides. Act. Do you call this acting? You disobeyed me, and for what? A couple of strangers. You risked everything we've built for a moral lesson that may never even be remembered. You have no idea what it means to live in the world. Life is harsh, Ethan, and it punishes the foolish. Ethan felt a pang of guilt, but also a surge of determination. Father, I understand that life is harsh. I understand that rules exist for a reason, but sometimes rules must be weighed against what is right. These sisters were helpless. They had no one else to turn to. Braveheart could give them a chance at survival. Isn't that worth something? The tension between them seemed to vibrate in the air. Mr. Carson's breathing was heavy, and Ethan could see the battle in his father's eyes, the struggle between anger and admiration, between rigid authority and the recognition of courage. For years, Mr. Carson had raised Ethan to be obedient, to follow the rules without question. And yet here was his son defying him, guided not by fear or desire but by conscience. It was maddening and impressive all at once. You speak of conscience, Mr. Carson said, his voice quieter now, almost a growl. Do you think the world will reward this? Do you think helping strangers will come without cost? Do you understand that every action has consequences, Ethan? Not just for you, but for this family? Ethan nodded. I understand, and I accept those consequences. I know I have disobeyed, and I am ready to face whatever punishment you see fit, but I cannot regret helping them, Father. I could not have lived with myself if I had done nothing. Mr. Carson ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. You remind me of myself when I was young, he muttered. Full of idealism, thinking you can change the world with a kind heart and good intentions, but life does not work that way. Courage alone does not protect you from the consequences of your choices. Ethan lowered his gaze, understanding the weight of his father's words. He had chosen courage, yes, but he also knew the path ahead would be difficult. Still, he believed in the value of his decision. He had acted with integrity, with empathy, and he hoped that his father might one day see that. The confrontation escalated as Mr. Carson's anger resurfaced. He pointed a finger at Ethan. You will work harder than ever to make up for this. You will repair fences, tend to the livestock, and take on every task I assign without complaint. You must show that you are responsible, even when your heart guides you in ways I do not understand. Ethan accepted the punishment without protest. He knew it was deserved in the eyes of his father, though not in the eyes of his conscience. He rolled up his sleeves and set to work, repairing fences that had weathered storms, feeding animals that had been neglected in the rush of the morning, and checking supplies for the coming weeks. Every task was done with diligence, not out of fear, but out of a sense of responsibility. He knew that strength of character was not just about bravery in a single act, but about carrying oneself with integrity in the aftermath. As the day wore on, the initial anger between father and son began to soften slightly. Mr. Carson continued to work nearby, occasionally glancing at Ethan as he labored. There was still tension, still the unspoken weight of disobedience, but there was also a growing recognition of Ethan's resolve. The boy had acted out of compassion, and that was not something easily dismissed, even by a father hardened by years of struggle and tradition. Meanwhile, Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the sisters and Braveheart. He imagined them riding across the plains, the mule's hooves steady and sure, carrying them to safety. He pictured the expressions on their faces, the mixture of fear and relief, the gratitude that shone in their eyes even in the brief moments they had met. That thought warmed his heart, giving him strength to endure the scolding and the work awaiting him at home. By late afternoon, the harsh sun began to soften, painting the plains with a golden glow. Ethan paused for a moment, leaning on a fence post, his muscles tired but his spirit intact. He reflected on the meaning of courage and responsibility, on the difficult balance between following rules and acting on conscience. He understood, more clearly than ever, that doing what is right often comes with personal cost. Yet that cost, he realized, was outweighed by the value of saving lives and standing by one's principles. As evening approached, Ethan and his father sat outside the barn, each quietly attending to their own thoughts. The wind rustled through the tall grass, carrying with it the faint smell of the earth after a long day. Mr. Carson finally spoke, his voice lower, calmer, yet still carrying authority. "Ethan, you have made a choice that I do not fully agree with," he said. "But I cannot deny the courage it took to make it. Perhaps, in time, I will understand more than I do now." Ethan nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. He knew the road to full understanding would be long, and that anger and disappointment might linger, but he also sensed a shift, subtle but real, in the way his father viewed him. Courage, compassion, and integrity were beginning to leave their mark, not just on him, but on the man who had raised him. Night fell over the ranch, calm yet filled with the tension of unresolved conflict. Ethan had faced his father's anger and had endured it with dignity. He had proven, not just to his father but to himself, that he could act with courage, even in the face of fear and disapproval. The sisters were safe, Braveheart was serving his purpose, and Ethan had begun to understand the true meaning of sacrifice. Before going to bed, Ethan took one last walk around the ranch, gazing out over the plains bathed in silver moonlight. The stars sparkled like distant beacons, and he felt a sense of connection to the wider world, to the lives he had touched and the choices he had made. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, that his father's anger might flare again, and that the consequences of his actions would continue to unfold. But he also knew that courage, compassion, and moral integrity were forces more powerful than fear or punishment. As he lay down that night, exhaustion heavy in his body, Ethan felt a quiet pride and determination. He had acted bravely, even when the outcome was uncertain. He had helped those in need, regardless of the cost to himself. And in doing so, he had taken the first step in a journey that would shape the rest of his life. A journey defined not by obedience alone, but by the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult, even when it provokes anger, and even when it defies expectation. The ranch was silent now, the animals resting, the wind whispering through the tall grass, and Ethan's father watching quietly from the porch. It was a moment of reflection, of understanding, and of unspoken connection between a father and son. The path ahead would not be easy, but the foundation had been laid for something greater: mutual respect, recognition of courage, and the knowledge that true strength comes from the heart as much as from the hands. Ethan drifted into sleep with thoughts of the sisters' safety, of Braveheart's steady strides across the plains, and of the father who, despite his anger, was beginning to see the depth of his son's character. The night was long, but it was a night of growth, of understanding, and of the quiet triumph of moral courage. And with the dawn, a new day would bring new challenges, new decisions, and the continuing story of a young man who had chosen to act with integrity, even in the face of fear. The following days were some of the hardest Ethan had ever faced. Life on the ranch went on as usual for the rest of the family, but for him, each day carried the weight of the choices he had made. His father had not eased his anger entirely. Every task Ethan undertook seemed to be scrutinized, every movement measured. Yet through it all, there was a quiet recognition in Mr. Carson's eyes, a subtle acknowledgement that Ethan's decision to help the sisters was not born from thoughtlessness, but from courage and compassion. Ethan rose early each morning, long before the sun touched the plains. He tended to the animals, repaired fences, and worked the fields, performing each task with meticulous care. His muscles ached from long hours of labor, but he accepted the exhaustion as a part of his penance. He knew that Braveheart's absence had created a gap in the ranch's routine, and he worked harder than ever to compensate for it. Still, no amount of labor could replace the steady, dependable presence of his mule, nor could it erase the tension lingering in the air between him and his father. Despite the burden of responsibility, Ethan found himself thinking often of the sisters and their journey to safety. He imagined Braveheart carrying them across the open plains, the wind whipping through their hair, the fear slowly replaced with relief and hope. Each mental image of their safety strengthened his resolve, reminding him that every ounce of effort he poured into his work at the ranch was worth it if it meant that lives had been spared. He pictured their village, safe and welcoming, and the gratitude that must have shone in their eyes. This thought gave him a quiet warmth amid the fatigue and tension at home. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long golden shadows across the land, Ethan's father called him to the porch. "Ethan," he said, his voice steady but still tinged with lingering frustration, "I have been watching your work these past days. You have labored tirelessly, showing skill and responsibility. That is commendable, but commendation does not erase disobedience." Ethan nodded silently. He had expected this conversation. "I understand, Father," he said. "I know I broke your rules and I accept the consequences. I only hope you can also understand why I acted the way I did." Mr. Carson looked out over the plains, the wind stirring the tall grass, and for a moment he seemed lost in thought. "Your actions have cost us," he said quietly. "We lost a valuable mule, one that took years to train and care for. That was no small thing. And yet, I cannot ignore the courage it took for you to make that decision. Courage and integrity are rare, and I see them in you now, even if I struggle to fully approve." Ethan felt a mix of relief and respect. It was not a complete forgiveness, not yet, but it was a recognition of his principles and character. He bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Father. I only wanted to do what was right. I hope that one day, my actions can reflect the values you taught me, even if they seem different in this moment." As the evening wore on, Ethan returned to his chores, tending to the remaining livestock and ensuring the ranch was in order. The work was grueling, but it allowed him to focus his mind and find a rhythm, a sense of purpose amid the tension. Each swing of the hammer, each stroke of the broom, reminded him that responsibility and courage often traveled hand in hand. At the same time, he allowed himself moments of reflection. He thought about the sisters' journey and what they must have endured. They had faced fear and uncertainty, yet with Braveheart's help, they had found a chance at safety. Ethan smiled faintly, imagining their relief when they finally reached their village, and the gratitude they had likely felt. That knowledge gave him strength to endure the hardships at home and reinforced his belief that his decision had been the right one. In the days that followed, Ethan began to notice subtle changes in his father's demeanor. While Mr. Carson remained strict, he also began offering small nods of acknowledgement, brief words of advice rather than reprimand. These gestures, though modest, carried significant weight for Ethan. They were signs that his father was beginning to see the value in courage, integrity, and compassion, even when they came at a personal cost or challenged tradition. Ethan continued to work tirelessly, knowing that his actions spoke as loudly as his words. He repaired fences with precision, fed the animals with care, and maintained the fields with diligence. Each completed task was a quiet testament to his character, a demonstration that he could be trusted, even when his choices deviated from his father's expectations. Despite the progress, Ethan never forgot the lesson that had sparked all of this. Bravery often required sacrifice. He had risked his father's anger, given away a prized mule, and faced the possibility of severe punishment, all to save the lives of the sisters. And while the path had been difficult, He now understood that the most meaningful victories were often those that came at a personal cost. The sense of fulfillment that arose from helping others, from standing by one's principles, was worth far more than any comfort or praise he might have received otherwise. One morning, a rider arrived from the neighboring village, bringing word that the sisters had reached safety. They were well cared for by their community and had expressed deep gratitude for Braveheart's role in their escape. The news filled Ethan with profound relief and joy. The sisters' safety was a validation of his decision, a confirmation that his courage had made a real difference in the lives of others. When he shared the news with his father, he noticed a subtle change in Mr. Carson's expression. The rigid lines of frustration softened, replaced by a glimmer of pride. "You did what you thought was right," Mr. Carson said quietly, "and it appears you were correct. They are safe. That is something to be proud of." Ethan felt a warm surge of emotion. He knew the journey was not yet complete. Forgiveness and understanding were still unfolding. Yet this moment marked a turning point, a bridge between conflict and reconciliation, between fear and pride. He realized that courage, combined with responsibility and integrity, could indeed create change and inspire respect, even in those who had once opposed him. In the following weeks, life on the ranch returned to a semblance of normalcy, but Ethan carried with him the lessons learned from this experience. He had discovered the importance of moral courage, the value of sacrifice, and the power of empathy. He had faced the wrath of his father and endured it with dignity. He had helped those in need, knowing that the act itself, not the reward, was what mattered most. Ethan's father, though still stern, began to show signs of trust and recognition. He allowed Ethan more autonomy, consulted him on decisions, and acknowledged his judgments. The bond between father and son, once strained by anger and misunderstanding, began to strengthen through mutual respect and acknowledgement of character. Ethan, in turn, learned that true courage was not just about a single brave act, but about living consistently with one's values, facing challenges with determination, and accepting the consequences of one's actions. He understood that every choice carried weight, but that integrity and empathy were qualities worth defending, even when the world seemed unyielding. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting a warm glow over the ranch, Ethan sat quietly on a fence, reflecting on the journey that had begun with the decision to help the sisters. He thought of Braveheart, of the sisters' safety, of his father's slow but growing understanding, and of the lessons that would guide him in the future. He felt a sense of peace and purpose, knowing that courage, compassion, and moral integrity were guiding principles he would carry throughout his life. The night fell gently over the ranch, the stars twinkling above like distant guardians. Ethan's thoughts were filled with gratitude for the sisters' safety, for the support of the animals who had been his companions, and for the slow but meaningful recognition from his father. He understood that the journey of life was one of continuous learning, that courage was tested not only in a single act, but in the ongoing commitment to do what is right, even when it is difficult. As he lay down to sleep, Ethan felt a quiet confidence in the choices he had made. He had faced fear, anger, and uncertainty, and had emerged with his principles intact. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, but he also knew that the foundation of courage and compassion he had built would guide him through every trial. Ethan's story, though far from over, had already taught him profound lessons about responsibility, empathy, and the enduring power of moral courage. The sisters' safety, the recognition of his father, and the quiet pride that came from knowing he had acted rightly were victories in themselves. And in the quiet of the night, with the plains stretching endlessly before him, Ethan knew that the path of integrity, though often difficult, was always worth walking. The days that followed were quieter than those filled with confrontation and fear. The ranch had settled into its rhythm once again, and Ethan had grown stronger, not just in body but in spirit. Each morning, as he tended to the fields and animals, he carried with him the lessons he had learned over the past weeks. Courage was more than a momentary act, compassion was more than words, and integrity was a lifelong commitment. The journey of the mule, the sisters, and his own choices had left an imprint on his heart that would not fade. Ethan's father, Mr. Carson, had begun to show changes that were subtle but significant. He no longer scowled at every movement Ethan made. Instead, he offered brief nods of acknowledgement and occasionally shared advice without the harsh edge that had characterized their earlier interactions. It was clear that the father's anger had not vanished entirely, but it had been tempered by respect for Ethan's unwavering principles. In those quiet moments, a new bond began to form, built on mutual understanding and recognition of character rather than just authority. One afternoon, Ethan decided to visit the neighboring village to see the sisters and ensure they were truly safe. He rode cautiously across the plains, memories of the earlier days flooding his mind, the fear in their eyes, the hope that had shone when Braveheart had carried them toward safety, and the gratitude that had been expressed, though brief. Arriving at the village, he was met with warm smiles and open arms. The sisters, now rested and healthy, ran to greet him, their eyes shining with relief and appreciation. "You saved us," the older sister said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We don't know what would have happened without Braveheart without you." Ethan shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips. "You were brave too," he said. "I only helped you along the way. You had the strength to hold on, to keep going when things were difficult. Braveheart just made sure you could reach safety." The younger sister hugged his waist tightly. "We will never forget what you did," she whispered. "You risked everything for us. We owe our lives to you." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest that no hardship on the ranch could match. The gratitude of the sisters was more than a reward. It was a confirmation that his choice had mattered, that his courage and compassion had made a real difference. He promised to visit again and to continue helping however he could, understanding that true bravery often extended beyond a single act, into a lifelong commitment to do what is right. When he returned to the ranch, the sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the plains. Mr. Carson was standing outside, watching the horizon with a quiet intensity. Ethan approached, feeling both nervous and hopeful. "Father," he began softly, "I have seen the sisters. They are safe, and they ask me to thank you as well for raising someone who would act with compassion." Mr. Carson turned to him, his expression softer now, lines of worry replaced with faint pride. "You have done more than I expected, Ethan," he said. "Not just in helping them, but in showing responsibility after the fact. You worked hard, faced the consequences, and still held to your principles. That is something remarkable." Ethan nodded, feeling a swell of emotion. The acknowledgement meant more than any words of approval he had ever received. It was not just forgiveness. It was understanding, respect, and the recognition that his actions had lasting value. The following weeks brought further lessons in patience, humility, and perseverance. Ethan continued his daily routines on the ranch, but he also began to think more broadly about how he could use his skills and courage to help others. He tended to neighbors' animals, offered guidance to younger children in the village, and helped with small projects that improved life in the community. Each act reinforced the truth he had come to embrace, that true courage is not only about daring deeds, but also about consistent acts of kindness and responsibility. At home, the relationship between father and son continued to grow stronger. Mr. Carson shared stories from his own youth, recalling times when he had acted bravely, sometimes against advice, and the lessons he had learned. Ethan listened intently, absorbing the wisdom and understanding that bravery and integrity were threads that ran through generations. The once strict rancher now saw his son as more than just a boy under his authority. He saw him as a young man capable of wisdom, courage, and moral strength. Ethan, in turn, learned to appreciate his father's perspective, understanding the weight of responsibility, the importance of discipline, and the challenges of leading a family and a ranch in a harsh, unforgiving land. They began to work together more seamlessly, their efforts complementing one another. The ranch became not just a place of labor but a place of mutual respect, shared goals, and quiet pride. One day, as Ethan repaired a fence near the northern edge of the ranch, he looked out over the plains and saw Braveheart trotting toward him. The mule had returned safely from the sisters' village, having completed his duty with steadfast loyalty. Ethan knelt beside him, stroking his soft fur and whispering words of gratitude. Braveheart nuzzled him gently, as if acknowledging the bond they shared, a bond that had grown stronger through trials, courage, and shared purpose. As the seasons changed, the story of Ethan's bravery and the mule's role in saving the sisters spread through the neighboring villages and towns. People spoke of his courage, his compassion, and the difficult choices he had made. The story inspired others, reminding them that even in a world filled with challenges, kindness, bravery, and integrity could prevail. Ethan's actions became more than a personal achievement. They became a symbol of hope, a reminder that one individual could make a difference when guided by conscience and heart. Through it all, Ethan continued to grow. He learned that heroism was not always celebrated with fanfare, that sometimes it was quiet, unnoticed, and internal, yet no less important. He realized that the impact of one's actions extended far beyond immediate recognition, affecting lives, shaping communities, and creating ripples of change that could last for generations. The bond with his father, now strengthened, became a source of guidance and comfort. They worked side by side, facing the challenges of ranch life together, sharing moments of laughter, reflection, and understanding. Mr. Carson no longer saw Ethan's courage as a threat to tradition, but as a continuation of it, a living testament that bravery and compassion could coexist with responsibility and hard work. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ethan sat on the porch with his father, looking out over the fields. "You know, Father," he said softly, "I never expected the choices I made to change so much. I only wanted to help them, to save their lives, but I have learned so much about responsibility, courage, and integrity in the process." Mr. Carson nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "And I have learned something too," he said. "I have learned that sometimes the heart must guide the hand, and that courage and compassion are worth every challenge they bring. You have made me proud, Ethan, not just for what you did, but for who you are becoming." Ethan smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The trials, the fear, the anger, they had all led to growth, understanding, and a stronger bond between father and son. The lessons learned, the lives touched, and the integrity shown had created a story far greater than a single act. It had created a legacy. The ranch, with its wide-open plains, quiet rivers, and steadfast animals, became more than a place of work. It became a place where lessons were learned, courage was tested, and moral strength was forged. Ethan understood that life would continue to bring challenges, that choices would continue to demand courage and integrity. But he also knew that he had built a foundation strong enough to guide him through every trial. As the night settled over the plains, the stars shining brightly above, Ethan reflected on the journey that had begun with a single decision: to give his best mule to save the Apache sisters. That act had unleashed anger, demanded courage, and tested his principles, but it had also brought safety, respect, and understanding. He realized that life's most important lessons often came wrapped in difficulty, and that the true measure of a person was not in avoiding challenges, but in facing them with bravery and compassion. Ethan's heart was full as he looked toward the horizon, where the fields met the sky. The sisters were safe, His father's respect had been earned, and his own character had been tested and strengthened. The story of the mule, the sisters, and the young man who had chosen courage over fear would remain in his heart forever, a reminder that integrity, empathy, and bravery could shape not just a single life, but the lives of many. And so, with Braveheart by his side, his father walking beside him, and the plain stretching endlessly before him, Ethan felt a quiet, enduring triumph. He had faced fear, endured anger, and acted with a heart guided by compassion. His journey had taught him that courage is never without cost, but it is always worth it, and that the choices made with integrity can create ripples of change that echo far beyond the moment, leaving a lasting mark on the world and on the people whose lives we touch.